How we doing, folks? It's minging out there, so we ain't going out with the camera today. I was supposed to be going out doing kingfishers, but that's besides the point. We can do that later on. So we're back in the workshop and we're going to do a walking stick that I've been meaning to do a film on it for ages and ages, and it is going to be a deer antler thumbstick, the king of thumbsticks as I call them, because I don't know, there's just something about deer antler, and if you get a good thumbstick, they will literally, they'll last a lifetime, they will, but they're a little bit trickier to put together than a normal, like a natural thumbstick, if you will. So generally the ones, you know, I do a lot of these, I do a lot of oak thumbsticks, so you might have seen me make these, and they generally I end up painting them. I'll put a couple of pictures up now. So that's the kind of thing I do the majority of the time. But if someone's after like a something special, or they've asked me to do a deer antler thumbstick, you know, this is what you can end up. So that's one I made for the missus. I ended up, it had a big curve in it, that one, so we had to cut it and spin it around. But you know, I don't know, there's just something about it, and I like the look of them, and every one is kind of unique, but they can be a bit tricky. It can be tricky to, not particularly to make, but tricky to find the right material for the job. So deer antler, right, so for those that don't know, deer, they shed their antlers every year and they grow a brand new set back, and when they shed them antlers, they end up, if they're on a farm, obviously the farmer will pick them up and sell them to whoever. You can be very, very lucky and actually find them yourself. I have never ever found a red deer antler, which is and it's not been for the lack of trying. So if you're lucky, you'll be able to find one. A lot of the time, I know people that do sell them, and I end up buying them. So you can get them from walking stick supplies, and like I said, if you know someone, they might put some decent parts away for you. So this is the raw material for the job. So this is what you'll end up with. But as I was saying before, everyone is kind of unique. So that particular one, the tine on that one is quite small, but it's got a nice rounded part there which is comfortable for the thumb. And again, if you look at the bottom of that one, it's really nicely round, which is good for the transition from the actual thumb stick, or the thumb part of the stick I should say, the deer antler, to the actual shank of the stick. So, and then if you look at these two, so this is one that I've already prepared, but we're going to go through that later. You can see the sectional detail of that one. They're quite oval, so it's a little bit more difficult to transition down to the shank, but again, we'll talk about that later on. That one, I don't know, quite sharp on there, but it's what it is, and you've just got to find one that's comfy in the hand. So what we'll do now, we'll have a look how we prepare these, because it's not as simple as just putting a rod in there and then plonking it onto the shank. There's something, there's a bit of prep work that we need to do before this goes onto the actual stick. So let's have a look at that now. Right, so we've selected our piece of deer antler for our thumbstick V, the handle of the thumbstick. So as I was mentioning before, we've got a bit of prep work to do. So if you look in there, you see that section. Now that is called the spongiosa. So it's almost like, if you know what a crunchy bar is, it's like a honeycomb. Now, when you dig into that, it's hard. It is hard, but it's nowhere near as strong as the outer core of the deer antler. That's where the real strength is. So what we have to do is take that out as much as we can, and then what I like to do, so you can see there, we've taken it out, to, I don't know, within a few millimetres of the outside of the deer antler. Then we've got a piece of oak, which is a piece of rod, probably, I don't know, maybe 3/4 inch doweling, and then we've epoxy resin that into the deer antler. So when we then put our steel rod in, which is how we're going to attach it to the shank, it's very, very strong. That over time, when you do it initially, so you drill that out, put your steel threaded bar in, and araldited it in, or epoxy resined it in, initially it'd be fine. But over time, when that levering action of using the stick, it will potentially start to degrade, and that becomes a weak point. So we need to kind of get rid of that. Not too bad in the tips, because there's no pressure on the tips. They're only kind of ornamental, if you will. But this part of the stick, where there's going to be a lot of pressure on and levering action, we need to sort that out. So let's get shut of that. So for this part of the exercise, I'm going to use a Forstner bit, and we're just going to drill that out, and then we're going to use we've got a Dremel multi-tool, you know, mini tool, and then we're just going to put like a carving head on that, and then we're going to get as much of that out as we can do. Right, we've just got the deer antler set up in the machine vise, and I'm going to try it with the Forstner bit. You can use whatever you want, to be honest. I mean, I've got some little like carving bits that would probably do it, and if you haven't got a Dremel, a cordless will do the job fine. So let's see how we go on with this. Quite suited with that. And then what we can do, put a smaller bit in. If we want to take this side out, so we take that out now, and just, and there we can see that's nice and hollow. So we've got it out to, I don't know, maybe an inch. That should, no, it's more than an inch, probably an inch and a half. If you're a little bit worried about going out the side, because we've literally left about probably 4 mil on either side, just put a smaller bit in and take a bit less out. There we go. So I think that'll be all right. We've probably gone down to about there, a good couple of inches, so that'll give us enough to go at. So that's nice and clean now. What we need to do, we need a piece, I generally use oak, use whatever you like, but it's a nice strong timber. We'll get a piece of oak, cut a piece of doweling, and then we'll get that epoxied in. So once we've got it near enough, you can either carry on with a knife or a chisel or whatever you decide, but probably the most useful tool that I have for stick making is this, which is a Black & Decker power file. I would not be without one of these. They're invaluable. So effectively all it is, that's a bit of a fine belt on there. It's just a handheld belt sander or a linisher or whatever you want to call it. We have different abrasive grades of belt that we can put on here, and they're superb. they shift a lot of material. So we can see that's just going in nicely. Nice snug fit. What we're doing there, we're just checking the depth that we need to go down to on your pencil. Transfer that over onto your dowel, and then that'll tell you how much further you need to go down. So there, we've got our mark on there. As I said before, they were right down to the bottom. If I take that out, a little bit of green paint showing in there, so that shows that we're as far down as we need to go. And it doesn't have to be a tight fit, because we're going to fill this up with epoxy resin shortly, so I'm happy with that. Right, let's get that bonded in. So into the deer antler. Plenty in there, make sure you've got plenty in, you don't want any voids. Put some onto our oak dowel, so don't be shy with it. Then what I like to do is generally just spin it round, work that epoxy in there, and then make sure you fill that void up down the side if it is a little bit of a slack fit. There we go. Bob that in the vise, and we'll leave that to dry. I know it says 4 minutes, but I'm going to leave that for half an hour. We'll go and get a brew and come back to it. Okay, so while that's drying, we need to address the main part of the stick, which is the shank. So, as I said before, each piece of antler is unique, and in the way that all the profiles are different. So they're different that way and they're different that way, and also the actual section. So in an ideal world, you'd find one that is exactly the same, but it isn't that easy. That one's a belter because it's practically round. That one is a right funny shape. It's like almost like an almond. So what we have to do then is think about a spacer. So you never put, well, I never do anyway, I'd never put that straight onto a stick, because you need a transition, so you need to put a spacer in. Now we're going to use some hardwood that we've got. I'm running out of black buffalo, so we're going to use a hardwood. So if I show you on here, so if I was to draw a simple thumbstick there, and then that's the shank, that transition, which is from there to there, which is your spacer, wants to kind of complement both the shank and the actual thumbstick. If you had one like that, and there's your stick, and then you've got that kind of arrangement where you've got a very shallow spacer, well a thin spacer, that just doesn't look right, it doesn't flow right. Aesthetically, when you look at that, it isn't very good. So you want a nice smooth transition. Sometimes that might be a case of, in this particular instance, what we'd do, we'd pick a larger shank, so a bigger diameter, and we'd make that spacer a little bit longer. It doesn't matter how long you make it, you know, that would be twice as long as it was before, but you've got that nice smooth transition and it's a lot easier on the eye. So that's what we've got to bear in mind. So we're gonna have to have a troll through our stick collection that are drying out there and see if we can find one that matches that profile perfectly, or as near as we can get to it. Yep. Right, so while that's drying, this is the actual shank that I'm going to use. Now, when I found that piece of deer antler, or acquired that piece of deer antler, I found this stick to match it, and I'd already kind of prepared it. So I'd straightened it and taken all these little nubs off. So what I'll show you now is how we get to this stage on another stick. Whew. Right, we've got a few up here that are drying. Well, they shouldn't be far off dry, these, to be honest. I'll try not to break my neck. Now let's find one. This one will do. Right, this will do for demonstration purposes. Let's go back in the dry. Whoop. Look at them. Figs. Up the figs. Okay, right. So if we put that, let's just have a clear up a bit. If we put that on the bench is completely flat. We can see we've got a right wonky donkey there. So first job, let's cut it something like to length. So if I'm stood here, I generally, when I'm cutting a thumbstick, that's kind of the position that you're in. So I'll cut it a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 inches longer, and we can trim it down later on. But we'll get our new Swiss Army knife. Whether my other one will turn up, I don't know, but I think it's lost. These are fantastic for walking stick makers. This is the Forester, and it has that amazing little blade on it that is so sharp. You can see there. A great little knife. Right, so we have our stick. That, taking that off, it's worked out a little bit better. It's taken some of the kick out of it. So when I'm doing, if I'm doing say half a dozen or 10 sticks, doing a batch of them, straightening them, I will use the steamer. So I have a steamer set up where I have a big pipe, a big steel pipe, and I set the wallpaper stripper up with a hose, and I can do multiple sticks at once. If I'm just doing a one-off, I'll just do it with the hot air gun. So first thing, before I straighten it, you can see these little nubs on here where a branch will potentially grow out of. What I like to do before I straighten it, I take all them off, and for that I use the power file. So I just take them off, So working, yeah, if you rub your hand down, you'll be able to feel them. One there. And I think it makes a nice feature of the stick actually. There's another one. They show up particularly well on these darker hazel shanks. Sometimes you might have a stick and there's hardly any on. But on this particular one we've got quite a few. But that's what makes every stick individual. Right, we'll just have a look at that so you can see how wonky it is. So we've got a big bend there that we need to take out. That bit actually isn't too bad from there down to there. That's our main area that we need to take out. Number of ways you can do this. This is what I've made for straightening my sticks out, and I use this pretty much exclusively. So that goes in the vise, and we can see we've got these different profiles, and the only these are all exactly the same profile, but the only difference is that the gaps are different, so probably 2 or 3 millimeters different. So when I'm doing a bend in the wood, obviously that won't fit in there, it goes in the tightest one, if you will. So we don't want it slack like that with loads of play. You want it as tight as it'll go. It won't go in that one, but it'll sit in that one. So as I said before, find the area where we've got our most deviation, which is there. So what we want to do, we want to heat that part of the shank up. And all we're doing, by heating it up, we're just opening the fibres of the wood. So the stick is cured, you can tell that's dry. So these have been drying for probably 9, 10 months, something like that. So they're ready to work now because they've been outside, they've had plenty of airflow through them. All we need to do now is to straighten it up. So heat gun, not too close, and we need to keep it moving. If we stay in one spot, it's going to damage the bark on the shank, which is not what we want. So we just need to keep turning it and applying that heat. So this is not an exact science. If we give it a few minutes, we'll try it in the bender and you'll know whether it's ready. You don't need to put a lot of pressure on. If you put too much pressure on and it's not ready to bend, there is a chance that you will break the stick. So you've got to be patient with it. So once we think that that's had enough, I'll give that a couple of minutes now. We'll try it in the part there where it'll, and then I just tend to sight it down the stick and then just a gentle pressure. Have a look down it. That's better already. The best way to do it is to put it on the bench while it's still warm. Just keep working it. So that's that particular shank straightened. It's never going to be like a snooker cue, but again, it's the character of the stick. You know, it's reasonably straight. We've got a I don't know, I don't think it's so bad that really. It's a natural thing, don't forget. But yeah, the majority of those big curves are taken out of it, so I'm happy with that one. That's going to the side. This is the one that I've already worked on. This is the one for that particular Thumbstick V. A bit more of a powerful stick. It's a larger diameter, this one, and a little bit paler. It's a nice strong stick is that. So what we need to do now is show you how we attach the Thumbstick V to the shank. Okay, so that's where we're up to. That has now gone off. That is set. The epoxy's set. We'll do it on the bandsaw while we've got the bandsaw set up. All we're going to do, we're just going to cut that off. And that's what we end up with. So we've taken all that honeycomb centre out, replaced it with that oak dowel, if you will, and that is ready to go on the shank. Well, not quite yet, we've a little bit of work to do with that yet, but so once we've cut that off, we've just cut that off on the bandsaw, we need to make sure that's completely flat. We want a nice flat face for it to go onto the stick. So we're going to have a, like I said before, we're going to have a spacer, and then we're going to attach it to the stick. So we'll do that with a file. There we go. That really does need to be perfectly flat because we want a nice seamless joint with our spacer that we're going to use. Another way of doing it, if we've got some oxide paper, so we've got, let's try and find something a bit finer. So this is 120 grit. Again, something nice and flat. So a piece of glass is ideal, but this piece of workbench is nice and flat. Just put that on there. And there we've got a nice flat surface for our transition. So we've got that. We've got our stick, which isn't too far out, to be quite honest, so we're not going to need a massive spacer on that. Maybe, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch, something like that. That's nice stuff actually. I don't know what it is, but that's about the right thickness, so I think we'll use a piece of that. What we need to do is just mark roughly the size that we're going to need, so draw around there. And then we want to make it a little bit bigger, a few millimetres bigger, and we can take that off later on. Just need to get that out of there now, so bob it in the vise. There we go. That's our hardwood spacer there. This is the stage that we're at then. So we've got our stick straightened, that's ready to go. We've got our Thumbstick V with our piece of oak epoxied in there. That's nice and flat and at the right angle. We don't want it on the wonk. It's got to be as square as we can get it. And then we've got our spacer. So what's that? 3/4 of an inch piece of hardwood. It has to be larger than the diameter of that base. So if we sit that on, you can see there we have a little bit to play with, and also when we sit it on top of there, we've got even more to play with. So that is going to be a nice transition from thumbstick V to the stick. Right, let's show you how we attach it now. So the only way I ever attach these is by inserting a length of threaded bar. So the threaded bar will probably come, there's no exact science, but it'll probably come a good 2/3 of the way up that piece of deer antler, and will probably go into the actual shank by another maybe 3 or 4 inches. So we need to prepare that now. 10mm threaded bar. So as I said before, that's the kind of distance we want up into there. Then we've got to allow for the spacer, which takes us to there, and then a good 3 inches. So that's the kind of length that we want. So we'll put that in the vise now, chop it off. Let's have a look how long that is. So that's 190mm, which in old money is about 7 1/4 inches. If you had it too short, obviously it's not going to be a strong connection or a strong transition between the 3 components. So the longer, the stronger. But obviously you can only go so long because you're not going to be able to drill right down into that. So within reason. So what we need to do now is work out how deep we need to drill that. So if we, like I said, roughly 2/3 up there, and then we're going to transfer that onto our drill bit. A piece of masking tape. That's how deep we need to drill that one. So find the correct drill bit, which it wants to be as tight a fit as we can get. So that's the right size drill bit. What we need to do now is just transfer that depth onto our drill. You can give it a little bit more if you want, and then we're just going to put a piece of tape on the drill bit, and we know how deep to go with it. So a little bit of masking tape on, or whatever you've got, and then when we've drilled down and reached that point, we know that we're deep enough. For this one, we're just going to do it in the vise. So again, when we put it in the vise, if we put it in and clamp that up, we've got to be mindful that that is kicking off at a little bit of an angle. What I like to do is to try and put it in. We've got a little bit of a spacer there, and it's kind of kept that straight. We don't want to go off at an angle and throw everything out, because with you using the exact same diameter drill, you haven't got a lot of play. If you're new at the game, I would suggest using a drill bit that is maybe 1 millimetre bigger. So using an 11mm drill bit, and then what that gives you a little bit of play. So when you put the piece of threaded bar in, if you're not quite plumb with everything, because the 3 components have to marry up, so you've got your thumbstick V, your spacer, and then the surface, that face of your stick. If they're not all perfectly square with each other, and that piece of bar isn't in the right orientation, it's going to throw it out, and you're going to end up with gaps between that, and it just won't look right. So like I said, if you're just starting out, I would suggest using a slightly bigger drill bit, and then you have a little bit more wiggle room. So I'm going to use that because I'm pretty confident that I can get it right. So we're just going to get our pencil, mark there or thereabouts in the centre, rack of the eye. What I will do is just drill a small pilot hole just to get me started. So these big drill bits, they're not that accurate. So again, looking down the drill, down the angle of the drill, you don't want to be like that and you don't want to be like that. You want to be square, and also think of that plane as well. You've got to get it right both ways. So we've got our little pilot hole, and then just get it started. Have a look down there and have a look down that way. Just keep checking. Okay, that is that drilled out. There we go. That shouldn't be too bad. If you find that you've drilled it and it isn't perfectly square to that face, there's nothing to stop you then putting that on your sander or however you chose to flat that off, and you can change the angle of that. You know, if you take a little bit off, you can square that up. So it's not the end of the world if you've made a mistake at this point. You can square that off. We've got our spacer now. We're going to do exactly the same with our spacer. We should already have a hole in it. So that goes on there and that goes on there. That's sitting pretty well at the moment. And then our shank. So find the centre, and then assemble our two components. So we've got our threaded bar into the V and the spacer, and then that is how deep we need to drill out. So that takes us down there. This is going to be a nice strong stick. Hopefully that drill will be long enough. So you can see there, we need to drill more or less down to the chuck. So probably 2 or 3 millimeters short of that length. So we don't need to put a piece of tape on. So again, we'll put a little pilot hole in. Right, moment of truth. Drop our bar on, spacer on, and there we go. So, and what I find at this point is, I mean, I'm pretty impressed with that. That's pretty good, to be honest. If you turn it round, you will see there's a gap there. So you will find there is a sweet spot. So if you just turn each component round, and there will be a point where everything will marry up, and that is there. So that is the position that I want the whole stick to be fixed in. So what I'm going to do now is just take a piece of masking tape, put it on there, and then that gives me a surface to draw on. So if you look round here, I've no gaps at all, so I'm gonna put a mark on the stick on the actual deer antler. I'm gonna put a mark on there. I'm gonna put an arrow and write the word up, so it's that way, and I'm gonna put a line on there as well. So I know that when I've bonded all these components together, that's the way that they will go. It's obviously not going to go that way because it's upside down, so I know that if I line all them pencil marks up, that on there, and then that is the position that I'm going to glue it in. One thing we need to be mindful of, so before we glue it all, sometimes you get kind of an airlock in the actual chamber that you've drilled out. So because I know that we've drilled down beyond that mark, that little, where I've taken that tine off there, I'm going to drill a really tiny hole going into this hole, and that's just going to act as an air release. Because what happens when we fill this up with epoxy resin and we drop that in, it traps air and it becomes difficult to push down, and what it wants to do is rise back up, and it's a bit of a pain in the backside really. You can get rid of it, but it takes a while, and especially if you've got a fast setting epoxy, which this is 4 minutes, and we haven't time to be messing about really trying to get that air out. So I'm just going to, like I said, drill that tiny hole in there, the smallest drill bit that I've got, which are, they're really tiny. There we go. Probably, I don't know, maybe a millimetre. Might be less than that, 3/4 of a mil. So little tiny breather hole there. And then all we'll do after, we'll just put a little tiny bit of filler in that. You'll never see it. Okay, right, we're ready to get it all bonded together. What I tend to do is just spin it as it's going in. And then at some point you'll probably, if you look down here, you might see some coming out of that breather hole. Not yet. Right. That's gone in nicely. Just there's our mark. There's our mark. Let's get that excess off. You can see there's our 3 marks all lined up. What I will do before we clamp it, I'll just get any excess off. We don't want it too messy. It only means that when that's set rock hard, we're going to have more to sand off. So, okay, I'm happy with that. On go the clamps. Okay, and then it's just a case of pulling them down. There we go, plenty of tension on there, so that's holding everything together. Our lines are in line with each other. Wait for that to go off now. Like I said, it's a quick setting epoxy this. I know it says 4 minutes, but I'm going to leave that. I'm going to go and get my tea now. We'll leave that. That will be set by the time we've had some scran, and then we'll get it finished. All set. it should be set because it's about 6 days since I glued this up. We ended up doing other things. So back on the stick. So take these off. Like I said, these were just applying downwards pressure to the whole, to all the different components. I'll take that off. So that's what we end up with. It's important as well, I should have mentioned it before, when you put that piece of tape on, put the piece of tape flush with the top of the shank, because this will act as an indicator. When we take the extra wood off and get it down to its final diameter, this will act as a shield. So when we get down to the bore, which we don't want to take off the shank, it'll act as an indicator. So it's important that that is right up to the top, up to that collar. And also when you put in masking tape on, make sure it's a low tack one, because sometimes if it's a stronger masking tape, it can actually pull the bark off. So just something to bear in mind. So we're using quite a coarse belt on this one, and all we're going to do, I'm going to keep it rotating. I don't want any flat spots. So you'll see, looking closer, that we've got a bit of epoxy resin on the actual deer antler. I'm not too fussed about that, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take probably maybe up to 5 or 8 millimeters. I'm going to take some of this off and feather it down, so we will end up taking a little bit of the deer antler off, but you can't go too deep. If you look at that, there you can see you've only got so much deer antler to play with before you're into the inner core. So just be careful you don't take too much off. You can see there we're just going into the deer antler, and mindful that we're not taking any of the tape off. You can just nick the tape there, and that's about as far as we want to go with that. So we've taken the majority of the meat off. I'm going to take this coarse belt off, and we're going to put a finer one on now, and then we're just going to carry on. We'll take our masking tape off. So this next bit, once we've got the majority of the meat off with the power file, if you're not confident with the power file, you don't want to go too far, just get a strip of 120 or something like that, and then we're just going to do it by hand. Now, on the top of the thumbstick, we're going to use the same wood that we used for the spacer. So this material in here, that honeycomb, the spongiosa, we're actually going to take that out as well. So we're going to drill it, we're going to take as much of that out as we can, and then we're going to put a little piece of threaded bar in again. We're going to put our caps on, let them dry. Once they're dry and set, we're going to round them off nicely. So what we need to do now is get rid of that centre that potentially could give us a bit of grief down the line. Right, we've got our two caps cut, if you will, our two blanks for the caps. We're going to secure it by a bit of 6mm threaded bar. You don't, I mean, I have used in the past, I've used these little hardwood dowels, and they do the job absolutely fine, but we're going belt and braces with this one. So as we did in the main piece of bar that's in there, we're just going to use threaded bar. So corresponding size drill bit, just over 6mm I think. You can just test it, piece of scrap wood. There you go. That's a nice fit. So all we need to do now is our little blanks that we've got, just roughly find the centre. That's a slightly bigger one. And so all we have to do is drill down about 5mm. So there we go. They're ready to go on. So while this is drying another couple of minutes, a lot of people have been asking me about running courses. So as well as making sticks to order, I am going to start doing one-to-one courses. So if anyone's interested out there, just drop us a message. I'll put the email on the page now, and yeah, get yourself down here and we'll do some one-to-one tuition. So yeah, I look forward to doing that. Right, these are ready now, so we're going to chop these off and we're going to get these end caps on. Junior hacksaw. And we're just going to put our 6mm drill bit in. So another mixer of epoxy there. Plenty on. And then we just line our marks up. And that's what you'll end up with. So leave that, we'll leave that off for now. We'll go and grab a brew and come back and finish them end caps off. Okie doke. We're all dry now, so we can take this tape off. And we end up with something like that. So these are a little bit long at the moment. Now, bearing in mind, that threaded stud only came up about 5mm, so we can take a little bit off there. So we're just going to, again on the bandsaw, there we go. So that's all nicely trimmed off. We've taken about 5mm off the top, so they're not quite as big. And then we're just going to get the power file. We've got the nice course belt on the power file, and then we're just going to take these off to the contour, the same profile as the deer antler. Now I'm not too fussed about taking a bit of meat off here as well, so we want this kind of effect here where we're starting to highlight the grooves on the antler, and I think it gives a really nice effect, that a nice contrast between the dark brown and the almost ivory colour. So that's what we're going to do now. So a bit of work with the power file, and that's what you'll hopefully end up with. What we're going to do now, we'll just take the coarse one off, and then we're going to just do some refining, really, making sure that the thickness of this spacer is the same as this one. Well, they're not spacers, but they're tips, if you will. So on with the finer belt. And that's what we should be looking at now, making sure that these just taper in very, very slightly. We don't want is that coming out. So again, you'll know just by looking at it whether it looks right. That's looking pretty good. That we've just flatted the tops off, and then we're going to round these off. We're going to put it in the vise now, and back to our piece of 120 grit. So this is another product I like to use. It's called Abranet, and it's, I don't know how to describe it really. It's like well, you can actually see through it, but it doesn't clog up. So it's an abrasive cloth, if you will. And it goes right down to, well, I think this is what we're on there. So that's 240, and I think, yeah, 320. So you can get some really, really nice smooth finishes with this. But again, just grading it in. We don't want to take this. We want to leave that dark, and then this is just fading out. So there we are. We've got the top done. Everything's sanded off. There might be a little bit of refining to do before we put the final coat on, but 95% done that. I'm happy with that. What we need to do now, before we put anything in terms of varnish or finishes on, we're going to have to put our tip on. Assortment of tips there. So we want to find the corresponding size. It's quite a chunky stick, is this. So that's a little bit big. We just want to square this off on the bandsaw. We want to make sure the stick's the right height. So that's a little bit too tall. It's a bit too tall for me, is that. So now, when you're shortening a stick, don't take too much. I know it sounds obvious, but it's easy to say, oh, I need another couple of inches off that. Don't take a couple of inches off it. Just take an inch off, and then keep taking an inch off each time. There, that'll do. That's perfect, I think. Well, for me it is anyway. So let's get our tip on now. Right. So the way I put a tip on, you obviously need to know the depth. So just invert the stick, hold the tip against the stick, and just where your thumb is, you can put a little mark with a pencil if you want. and then just double check. So that's right. Piece of masking tape, but when you put the masking tape on, it's got to go on the tip side, so we don't want to take any of that bark off, and then just make sure that it's nice and square. So that's what you'll end up with. So the thickness of that corresponds, obviously that corresponds to the thickness of the tip. Now, nice sharp knife, new Swiss Army knife, and all we're going to do, we're just going to score around there, just pressing in. All the way around. So we've got a cut then all the way around. We can take our tape off. That's done now, and then all it's a case of doing is so this is a technique called candling. Gunsmiths actually use it when they're making the precision parts. So that's our tip for the walking stick, and we're just going to hold it over there, and it's just going to put some soot inside, and then when we put this on, we're not too far. It just leaves a mark where the areas are high, so we're not too far off with that. So those marks, just take them off. Try it again. Few final little adjustments, and there we go. That's what we end up with. So we can, don't put it on too fully, because we're going to bond that on. We're going to get some epoxy resin. We don't want that to go anywhere. Once it's on, it's staying on. And there we have it. That's all the hard work done now. What we need to do now is put a finish on it. So we want a finish on the tips, the spacer, the deer antler, and the shank. What we're going to do with the actual shank, a little bit of wire wool, fine wire wool, and we're just going to give it a going over. We've done the shank, that's ready for the finish on it. What we need to do is sort out the deer antler. Now, we don't have to go mad on this, so I like to use a combination of Autosol, which is a very fine abrasive metal polish, and also liquid metal polish. And all I want to do is just get a rag, and these bits that we've sanded that have turned white, we're just going to rub it in. Don't get any on the wood if you can help it, and we're just going to shine them up and just buff it off. If we get any in the indentations on the antler, we can just get, this is a little I think it's a shoe brush that's got brass wire on it, and just give it a clean up, and that's all it needs really. That's all it needs. So regarding the actual shank and the spacers and the tips, I've started using this finishing oil. There's different things you can use, but this is what I use. I use this finishing oil. So All it's a case of doing is applying it with a rag or a brush, take off the excess and then leave it to dry, and we'll give it about 3 or 4 coats. Get some on there, and then you'll see how it brings out the colouring. Look at that. And on the tips as well. And then once that's done, a little bit more on, and then you can see that really brings the colour out in that hazel bark. We don't need to go mad, we don't need to put too much on. So there we go, all finished. That is, in my mind, that's the ultimate thumbstick. A good old red deer antler thumbstick, and a stout one at that. So that's it for this one. That's how I make them. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but it's a good, that will last a lifetime. It's an absolutely bomb-proof stick. It's rock solid, that, a really, really stout walking companion. So that's it for this one. As I said before, we're going to be doing some courses, so if you're interested, drop us a message, DM us, and so it'll entail coming down here for the day, a day of instruction, one-to-one, and you'll actually go away with a finished stick of your choice, whether we do a painted one or a thumbstick or something like that, you know. So if you're interested, drop us a line. Thanks very much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, it'd be great if you could. If you've enjoyed the video, if you've learned something, press that like button, and thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next one.